Oh, my turn? Oh, I initiate calling step.
Oh yeah, I react with flowing ink.
I react with pivoting step.
Wow. This time I react with aligning ink.
Well, I react to your react with my hidden converging step.
I react with
Well, I progress my masterpiece. Go, my fish, go! Attack!
Oh no! It can't be!
This is React, the Arts of War. Yes, act, it's like the anime styled name. We're just gonna call this React for the rest of the video. Anyways, two players are engaged in a duel as they play as unique anime waifu artists, trying to kill their fellow artists by playing cards and positioning around a grid board. The big hook is the reacting, where players get to react to any card their opponent does with their orange abilities, as they mix abilities from their hand of cards, but also abilities from their standees on the board. Plus, there's even Magic the Gathering exhausting mechanics. React is a game that's bringing out Yugioh, Magic the Gathering, chess, and a little bit of a fighting game all in a single game now, and only takes 15 to 30 minutes. So let's get into it. Here's how to react. You try to kill your opponent's artist by hitting them 3 times, then you'll win the game. To do that, you have 2 types of abilities in the game: blue, or intention abilities, and orange, or reaction abilities. To start anything, you must first play a blue card, then your opponent has a chance to react with a orange card. If they don't, then you have a chance to react, then they do. Then you do. I think you get the point, so much reacting. Whenever both players decide to stop reacting, or the chain of cards hits 5, the card sequence resolves, but backwards, meaning that the blue intention card played first will happen last. Simple example of stuff happening backwards: Paintbrush Dude tries to attack this space. Then the enemy artist plays a reaction to swap positions, and look at that, since the Paintbrush Dude already targeted this space, it ends up killing itself. That's a good reaction. All you need to know on your turn is that you can either play a blue card from your hand, or play a card with a blue ability from one of the cards in front of you, which will either be one of your character's special abilities, or activating a standee you've summoned to the board. Sometimes by triggering a blue card, you'll be forced to exhaust standees at a cost. That doesn't mean they can't do anything, like they're still gonna attack and move, it's just that you can no longer play its card that asks you to exhaust them. When you're all done with playing blue cards, pass your turn, unexhaust all standees, then both players draw a card. On your opponent's turn, just play reactions on their cards. Both players keep passing off turns of starting action chains with blue cards, then seeing what happens with the chain reaction, typically resulting in some blend of moving, attacking, or spawning more standees. One last thing, your masterpiece, since your characters are artists after all. This is your ultra charged form of your artist, where eventually if all 3 masterpiece cards line up on the side of the board, you flip over your character card and have a super dual cool ability. To get there, players get 1 masterpiece advancement every turn, but can also use a character special ability to advance them more. Okay, that's the game. Let's get to the good parts of how this reacting game is, starting with how it looks. Now, quick disclaimer here, we are showing the deluxe version of this game right here with the acrylic standees and playmats. Ta-da! If you save $40 for the normal version, you don't get these double stitched playmats, instead a cardboard foldout, and cardboard standees instead of the acrylic ones. Cardboard or not, the standees look great, with the full anime characters especially looking and feeling good to move around. Speaking of art, that's everywhere in this game. Whether it's your character doing leaps on a card, transforming into new forms, or painting their masterpiece, there's art everywhere. And not just that, the game put the extra effort to have the backs of cards have a unique look for each character, and these can get divided even further for special summon cards or additional abilities. You won't ever be accidentally shuffling the wrong cards together here. Speaking of cards, they are super easy to keep track of with the color coding on the blue versus orange. If you want to know probabilities of cards, how cool is it that each card shows you the ratio of it in the deck? Oh, and if you ever take damage, you flip over your masterpiece card. What a great double usage of cards. Plus, picking up a new character is quite smooth, since every single character sheet explains everything you need to know when starting out, with a fat area to discuss your asymmetrical nuances, and then a playstyle section that actually tells you how to play, so you don't do anything too stupid at first. What's more, the asymmetry is easy to learn because each character only has 4 different cards in their deck. Yep, we said that right, only 4 different cards, just a bunch of copies of them. This makes the reacting part of the game very easy to grasp, where simpler characters only have 2 reactions, meaning that you'll pretty quickly grasp what your opponent is able to do to counter you. If you play against this fish dancer guy, you'll see that, oh, Either he can remove scales to spawn a fish to interrupt my movement, or he can do this repositioning frenzy to swap with things next to him. What's more is that on your turn, you play one blue card or pass your turn. That's it. While there's complexity in finding out how the cards combo or in exhausting your standees, to just simply try stuff out is super easy to get going, especially with the simpler characters. Speaking of characters, let's move on to gameplay pros, where we can finally start talking about the asymmetry that we've been hyping up. So once again with the disclaimers, we got sent a bunch of stuff, but only these 4 characters right here are review ready at the time of making this review. And there's going to be 8 characters in total to play, including the girl at the top of the Kickstarter page, which I have no idea how she works. Yeah, but we have her standee, so looks pretty good. Anyways, let's get on to these 4 characters right here. They're unique. The front of the box artist, the calligrapher, is all about spraying ink on everything like an octopus, especially on her summons, which do most of her heavy lifting. See, once these seal brush spirits have an ink on them, they can do an attack on something next to them. And guess what? You have 4 different brushes you can have on the board, so 4 possible attacks on your turn from different sources. The calligrapher is really about setting up big turns by setting up the board, using reaction cards like aligning ink to exhaust or refresh standees, or flowing ink to move a bunch of things on the board. See what she did there? She moved everything but herself because she's not inked. Want to play for late game control? She's your artist, equipped with a way to spend ink to draw cards and end your turn. Wow, balanced pot agreed. Once your board in hand is ready, you can masterpiece to literally give each of her standees an attack as a reaction. An attack as a reaction. Or we have my favorite, the shirtless fish dancer man, who poops out scales every time he leaves a space as he jumps around the board. Scales are super good because whenever there's 3 of them on a space, that spawns a fish. But these fish don't do anything except jump around, except for when you masterpiece, then you get frenzy, then each of his fish can jump, then attack in a single move. Frenzy, frenzy, kill your opponent. Oh yeah, the specific masterpieces are key in understanding the asymmetry. Like this girl, the painter, who is already super weird because you take your deck of cards and throw it out the window. Instead, you have a bunch of really strong armament standees diagonal to you with abilities that must follow your character's movement. The moment you masterpiece to become an entirely new form, these standees no longer are tied to the painter and can run around and slice or twang your opponent. Oh, and every time these armaments do something, intention or reaction, she'll have to pay dice that you roll at the beginning of every one of her turns. Wow, this is a mana system introduced for her character. And then her second mana-esque system is called Inspiration, which she gets one of every time she would have drawn cards, and she could just spend these one at a time to inspire to do any one of these actions, like moving, rearranging her armaments, spawning a new armament. Wow, the options. The wrinkle with the painter is that since she doesn't have a hand, she can only react with her armaments, meaning that her capabilities are always public to everyone. We'll end with the tagger real quick, who is all about dropping murals on the ground, and whenever anyone goes on those murals, something happens, like letting you draw a card, move something else, or of course do damage next to you. Needless to say, this guy's just bouncing off the walls on how much he's moving and finding ways to move himself onto murals, or his enemies next to certain murals. Cool thing about the murals is that his opponent can use them too. That's a whole different way to think about the board now. Yep, each character has a way to spawn things of their own on the board, making each matchup different. Let's just move on to the reacting of this game now because it's literally in this game's name. There's a lot to praise here, so let's start with how React usually has its reaction chain update the board state in some cool new way. What do we mean by that? Well, orange React cards are never hard negates or straight cancellation of other cards. Rather, they're more open and free-flowing to encourage creative play by thinking backwards in a stack. They're shaking up the game board through moving things, giving them attributes, or preemptively attacking before your opponent can. Since many cards, blue cards included, have you lock in at least some part of your outcome while played, this causes both players to think on their feet whenever playing cards or seeing their opponents play them. Want to attack the space I'm in that would damage me? Well, I'm going to swap places with your character so that your character ends up being in the space you targeted. Take the damage. Bigger example is, oh, you say you're going to swap places with my character, well, I'm going to move everything inked with flowing ink in this direction. Ha ha ha, you can't swap with anything anymore. And yes, my attack still goes through even though my attacking thing is not adjacent to it, because that thing only had to be adjacent when I first played the card. See how the players are just building this sequence every time they do an action, and then reacting and then playing off each other and giving more signals to each other as they play each card? I'm going to choose this direction to go towards. Let's make our past example even bigger. Oh, you say you're gonna move a bunch of stuff with flowing ink? Well, since you're locked in into moving in that direction, I'll just play a second swap card to swap everything. And once everything is resolved, I get away from your attack, which is still a win for me. Really, half the game is reacting to yourself to get more use out of your orange cards. Like how about saying that you're gonna attack, but that attack will only actually go through if you're inked. So announce the attack, then react to yourself to ink your standee. This stuff can get pretty interesting with the mind games, as you can play an initial intention card that seems to make no sense at all with the current board state, but you might have some reaction card to eventually make that initial move make sense. So then your opponent might just drop a reaction card to try to stop you, afraid of what will happen if you get your combo off. Sometimes your opponent doesn't react, then you decide to react to yourself. Then your opponent doesn't do anything. Then you react to yourself again. Then they react to that, blowing up your entire sequenced plan. The decision to commit cards into a stack can be tense as long as you think your opponent has orange cards, and no one is excluded from playing cards from the stack until it caps out at 5. Remember, pretty much every single reaction card affects the board in some way, with a big emphasis on moving standees. So you'll be constantly worried about what unit is moving where and how with their unique movement patterns. Like this guy right here, the dancer can move like a rook, straight down the board. Or this guy, the tagger, can teleport to any mural he set on the board, so it's like he's teleporting around. Or how about making your opponent move? There's a shield that forces something next to its move. Or this dancer can pull something towards him until they reach an open space.
Hello there.
Depending on your matchup and opponent's playstyle, you might play offensively on the board and leap towards your opponent. Or maybe you'll play defensively and just move back and forth and poop out scales. Or how about trying to pin this armament girl to the corner so she can't have the space to spawn all her armaments? Or you can be super wary about the tagger having a built-in reaction to his character to dodge, so he doesn't need to rely on his hand to draw dodges. Card play meets the positioning, cool stuff. And the last thing to round out all the gameplay pros is your character's masterpiece. This, in giving its specific character a unique, supercharged form, is a cool way to progress the game. Playing around the masterpiece is a fun push and pull, because you will usually have a decision to use a character ability to play for tempo now, or use the other character ability to play for the long run and investing in a part of your masterpiece to later have really strong turns. There's some counterplay in the masterpiece card placement game too, because there's only 5 places to put cards. Like how about placing a little bit more aggressive to prevent your opponent from completing their masterpiece anytime soon. If you want to play safe, you can wait until all 5 spaces are filled up, and then you can just replace an opponent's card with your own. Wow, what a big swing. Sometimes you just say, screw it, I'm gonna dedicate all my effort on the masterpiece end to prevent my opponent from achieving theirs. Look how many masterpiece actions your opponent has to dedicate to achieve their masterpiece now. Really nice how you can see how you want to slow down your opponent here in a system that originally has used to progress your character for a super cool gameplay swing, like having all your minions attack. One progression system with 5 cards, multiple ways to approach it, cool stuff. The last pro is that React has a lot of player interaction, especially more so than trading our games it has some of its systems from. This is because the game is not only so reliant on this living, breathing reaction stack of cards, but also on countering each other on the board. Like, we kid you not, in Yu-Gi-Oh! Nowadays, sometimes if your combo doesn't get countered, well, you can just play your cards, and then you can just keep going, and these trigger, and then I'll get more things, and get more things. But in this anime game, countering cards on either player's turn, even when your opponent starts reacting to themselves, is encouraged. So players are usually on their feet on what their opponent is doing. Now it's time for the con to react, and again, we only have a review copy and don't have everything in the final product. Like, we've been told that there are going to be general player aids, which would be really nice to supplement your character player aids. And then the rulebook is currently all online, but hey, at least we got enough plastic bags for everything. We have some actual component cons when it comes to the normal version cardboard standees. These were just needlessly big, and were often hitting each other when adjacent, especially making exhausting irritating. This will probably get minimized for the main printing, but we want to point it out because that's what we've previously shown on screen. Something we're more apprehensive about is when the cardboard standees are not see-through, which hurts the visibilities of tokens on the board, but nothing that can't be made much better in game with some slight bumps to pieces. With the acrylic standees, not really a problem, and the pieces can even go on the standee base for less fiddliness when moving summons or characters around. Definitely recommend to go for the acrylic if you're on the fence, but it is $40 more, so definitely understandable if you can't. Next, the masterpiece is not quite a masterpiece in visual design, where connecting the masterpiece for some characters is kind of annoying. Like, let's turn off the studio lights. Yes, you can definitely understand the right orientation after a while, but the low clarity just needlessly slows down the game because you have to have your masterpiece in the right position to get your super cool advanced ability. This can get worse when you flip over the masterpiece cards and it's black and white. This needs a quick, thicker outline of the borders or maybe arrows. Let's get into gameplay cons though, namely how the calligrapher, my main waifu, this girl on the box, is actually underpowered. See, she really needs her paintbrushes on the board to do stuff for her. That's the only way she does damage. So opening at least one of this summoning ink card is pretty necessary because you need more than 2 on the first turn, or else you're behind. You're probably gonna get one on your first turn from her character ability right here. This also goes hand in hand with how she's practically immobile, where the only way she can move is through flowing ink, which not only requires her to be inked, but it also moves everything else that is inked. Oh gosh, yeah, didn't really get away from my opponent there, but it can buy me some time as I dodge one attack. Wait, you might be asking, why are your opponents also going to be so inked? Well, the most tempo efficient for her right now is to use her character ability to ink everything on the board to get more ink as ammo. To make her less dependent on starting with summoning ink, we would prefer to have 2 paintbrushes start next to her early game, and then take out the summoning ink card for some other tech card to make her less immobile. Maybe give her another way to spend ink from herself. Like we reviewed her to every single other review-ready character in this box, which all have a way to move as an intention on their turn, which the calligrapher doesn't have. Plus, all these other 3 have more flexible reaction orange ability moves. Movement in games like these is really important, okay? Yeah, okay, nitpicks time. So there's a couple of quick nitpicks about components that we're sure will get cleaned up in the final printing. Like how the painter, she has this card to keep track of inspiration that the tokens are just too big for. Probably just prototype things, because you could just use the tokens as tokens. And remember how the dancer's masterpiece ability is that his fish attack with something called Frenzy? Well, it's supposed to give you 3 Frenzy tokens, but we didn't get any. We're predicting that these scales will be double-sided in the actual printing. Let's get on to gameplay nitpicks. This is the big one in deciding whether or not React is for you. The game can suffer from a little bit of unhealthy RNG, mostly because the cards are single use. If you don't draw any reaction spells at all, some characters are completely defenseless against their opponent on their opponent's turn, in a game system that's expecting you to be able to do something on your opponent's turn by reacting to their spells. We suggest a free mulligan for each player to get around this, or you could play as something like the painter who doesn't have a hand of cards at all. But, she does have some randomness in rolling her dice, and those fuel her weapons, so not devoid of randomness, but she's something you might want to play if you don't like bluffing a hand of reaction cards. Wow, look at that, I just drew all blues. Speaking of the painter actually, she is the only character we've seen that has a mana system tied to the playing of cards. And so React can sometimes feel victim to, if you have the reaction spell, you're almost going to always play it to not get hit. The nuance there is choosing where to move as you trigger their ability, or how to announce you're moving. Reacting is definitely not brain dead, but there's usually little reason to not drop a react when your character is under attack, especially when you factor in that everyone has a max hand size of 6, draw a card on each player's turn, and so you're discouraged from just hoarding cards. With only 3 health in this game and no way to heal, losing 1 health is huge, and it's going to be rare that you'll be in situations where you're willing to take damage to save cards. This is a really minor nitpick and mostly the nature of the game, at least for 3 out of the 4 characters we've played. But hey, for those with a lot of card game experience, this might be pretty nice to know. Then there's some rules questions that haven't been answered by React's online rulebook, like all this right over here. We're assuming yes for all those answers, but we'd want them to be clarified on either the cards in the game, an official FAQ, or just the rulebook. To wrap up the art, while we were previously praising it, there are some areas where it does feel kind of lazy. Like the tiger's masterpiece is the exact same as his murals. Thematic, but a little more difference would be nice. Or how the 3 calligrapher cards are just words on a scroll. Or actually, in some areas, some noticeable bold artistic decisions have been made. Like almost all the people we've showed this to said some version of, "Holy shit!" Yeah, seeing this art front and center is part hilarious in how overpowered her visuals are. Obviously, this doesn't affect our scoring, like how this dancer is also very proudly shirtless for kind of no reason, and the characters aren't doing anything inappropriate, but we're curious if toning these artistic decisions down would help to make this game appeal to more people. Yeah, think of the families, like think of if I want to bring this to work, or let's just move on to scoring. Now it's time for a tentative score on React, the Arts of War, by critically evaluating our aforementioned pros and cons, with the caveat of whether or not this is even a good idea in the first place. And so this game that's coming to Kickstarter with anime soul all over it is going to be a 8 out of 10. It is tentatively great. Trading card game players, or anyone who likes grid-based combat, we all invite you to check this out. It is really combining a lot of those ideas in a game that is as much about reacting to your special character as it is about reacting to your opponent's special waifu. With streamlined hands of cards, tapping characters, and supercharged modes with masterpieces, React offers a fresh take on the very old core of Yu-Gi-Oh! Chains. All in a way that is very accessible to modern board gamers, especially if you like anime, ha ha ha. Oh, we're on to you, React. We know what you're doing, okay? See, you're trying to bridge this gap between the trading card game audience and the board game audience, of which us at Shelfside are conveniently both of. You got us good. It's great for non-TCG players to get a feeling of what the reaction spell counterplay can be like. And then TCG players have a simple version of this chain reaction thing, but with an actual board where you can tap standees and move them around. React is definitely more of a supplement to trading card games if you're already in them, because this just currently doesn't have the same depth with zero deck building. As said in the pros, super awesome that it's easy to learn with 4 cards for each character, but then having only 4 cards you see over and over again doesn't make replayability as mind-blowing as it might initially seem with a bunch of decks of 30 cards. But then who knows, maybe the 4 other characters that aren't review ready add so much to replayability that the score for this game raises to an 8 out of 10, so we're only optimistic here. React also leans a little bit away from being a quick filler because, I mean, look at each player board. So there is quite a bit with each character to delve into, and some of the more hardcore characters that aren't review ready, that we sampled, like the tattooist here, who can attach cards to her moving bunnies, can cause a lot of analysis paralysis with the amount of movement options she has. So speaking of time, the box says 15 to 30 minutes, but we've seen games run a little over an hour or under 30 minutes, so it's really up to your dueling playstyles and dueling matchups. Sometimes both players will masterpiece and the game will still be going on with both players hanging on by 1 health. So if you like reacting to yourself and reacting to your opponent with MTG tapping with chest positioning and chain links and hero abilities for nuts gameplay, check this out. Oh, and then there's plenty of anime waifus, plenty of them. Yeah, React is tentatively great. I mean, check out all the animations on their website for their rulebook. Awesome to see. We got a link for React in the description below for their Kickstarter, but now let's get to our personal scores.
My personal score for React is gonna be a 7 out of 10. A good time. Gonna say it again, not really the biggest fan of 2-player games, but this one definitely sticks out to me because I like card games, I like resolving stacks and chain links, and I like messing around with positioning. Also like the weeb art, really wish more board games looked like anime nonsense. It's really crunchy and satisfying to think through future turns, what to expend on big burst turns now, and what to save as reactions when you pass your turn. You have to do so much bullshit to do 1 damage to your opponent, but doing your character's weird gimmicks while playing around your opponents makes those hits feel very well earned once the 2 of you are in this dance where you understand each other's capabilities and play around each other. And something that feels especially noteworthy to me is how all of the characters seem to have ways to spawn in more crap onto the board that makes it so that there's tons of interactables beyond just the characters themselves. That's always one of my favorite parts about these games with moving figures around hexes or grids, because having things like obstacles, traps, and power-ups are what really makes these types of games come alive for me. Unfortunately, I'm kind of a sick fuck and want even more crap on the board, whether that's from characters having even more types of cards that can play stuff down, or from maps having neutral terrain laying around. And that brings me to the real gripes I got that keep this from being a favorite that trumps my go-to 2-player games like Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is the lack of deck building. It's cool that there's a ton of characters to choose from, but their decks are super static and limited to a bunch of copies of a handful of cards. And while that is great for keeping everyone more consistent, that's veering way too close into the territory of, why are there even decks of cards in the first place? Because in my head, this should be like a thing where there's some sort of resource system for your actions, and then you always just have 1 copy of each of your cards that can be played instead of drawing and discarding from a deck. If there are gonna be decks, I'd much rather have a bigger pool of cards for each character that can then be used to build a deck that's perfectly tailored towards how I want to be playing the character. Customization and or progression is just such a staple for games that it feels off when it isn't there. And yes, there is the masterpiece mechanic, but that just leads into 1 card being flipped and is linear progression rather than branching. Then if we compare the mechanics here to games like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic, it kind of feels like it's not taking all the best parts of both when incorporating Yu-Gi-Oh!'s chain links with no resource system, plus Magic's tapping of cards. Because in Yu-Gi-Oh!, part of what makes the chain links super fun is when you build out your whole deck to do some absurdly big combo, and then your opponent does the same. And before you know it, you're resolving massive chain links involving like at least 10 effects. As for the Magic comparison, in MTG, you're allowed to add onto the stack in the middle of its resolution, and everything is a quick effect unless it explicitly states it's a sorcery, so they can get away with this design since everything is ultimately limited by how much mana you have, so it's okay to just let everything be super crazy since you have to budget your finite mana. In React, it feels really limiting in comparison when you can't start a chain with a reaction card, and then having a bunch of blue cards that are essentially sorceries or spell cards just feels pretty tame to me. Anyways, enough with the card game comparisons. The takeaway I'm trying to convey here is that if you aren't a fan of deck building and just want to dive in so you can play as asymmetric characters with super unique effects and pre-built decks to 1v1 someone on a grid board, React has a crazy good mechanical foundation as players try to weave in and out of each other's threats. Really cannot understate just how cool of a combat system React is and how well it works. It's just that for someone with particularly bizarre and eclectic tastes, it's good, just not quite amazing for me, but that's the type of thing that might make this absolutely amazing for those of you out there looking for these unique blend of mechanics without being too crazy with the commitment to deck building and huge sequences of effects resolving.
My personal score for React is going to be a 7 out of 10. I have a good time with it. I've always been a big fan of card games, and Shelfside would probably never exist if Daniel didn't get me into all of these trading card games when we were growing up. And React has some of the best feelings from especially Yu-Gi-Oh! You're managing a hand of cards here. You're worried about your opponent making counterplays on you when you're going in for big plays. And of course, chaining cards yourself allows for some really creative moves. To me, it's really fascinating how React blends the card game core with the positioning and using board abilities with playable cards that aren't part of your hand. Oh, and your character can advance to a new form with the Masterpiece, which have been all really cool to play with and something to look forward to every game. And what's rounding it out is that the game is usually under an hour, making a good fit for a 2-player game I can play frequently. I've played React about 10 times so far, both online and on person with multiple opponents. And yep, my predictions for enjoying it held up. It has a card game prose with interesting but not overwhelming character asymmetry. I found the endings of games to typically be quite tense, where there's more and more pressure on whether my opponent has reaction cards in their hand when I'm swinging for match point. So what's holding React back from being an 8 out of 10? Well, I had to compare it to other card games I've played: Netrunner, Ashes, Magic the Gathering, a little bit of Hearthstone, a little Vanguard, and a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the biggest comparison, where there's the action chain and playing cards from your hand at no cost. And React just doesn't quite reach the same highs as mid-2010s Yu-Gi-Oh!, mostly because of the lack of card variety. See, I've spent countless teenage hours reading up and experimenting with all the cards of Yu-Gi-Oh! And love seeing the deck building possibilities and guessing what copies of cards people are running in their decks. That leads to a lot of silly moments in games where people tech or sneak in certain cards or try to use cheese strats. React just doesn't have that with only 4 different cards in a deck. I want more. More would make this game feel more silly, or diverse, or surprising, or theory crafting enough for me to really get that game to the great status, especially for a 1v1 game. For me, chains work really well when the cards themselves are super cool, and then you see them sometimes interact with one another. What's even better is when the countering has unexpected deck build cards to create really interesting and or funny board states. In React, everyone just knows each other's cards. Reaction happens a little too predictably, and of course you'll see the same cards played on one another in the stack. For me, this is React's competition. All these colorful, diverse cards that all play off of one another in complex ways. React goes in the simpler direction with simple spawns that you can have a bunch of on the board and have them literally move around, which is cool. It's just not going to reach the same heights of Yu-Gi-Oh! Just constantly drawing a bunch of cards, searching your deck for things, or synchro summoning monsters, or banishing things from the graveyard. It's Yu-Gi-Oh! There's some magic there. I haven't quite felt that yet in React. React's rules and approach to cards make it a better game if I'm going to play with someone who doesn't know Yu-Gi-Oh! But I have Daniel and plenty of friends who play Yu-Gi-Oh!, so it just doesn't dethrone that for me right now. Plus, with my card game experience, some things just feel kind of gamey to me, like how your hero typically cannot attack even though there's things right next to them. I would have wanted at least some of the heroes to have an ability to spend a lot of resources to do a basic attack. Or what really threw me off at first is that you have to exhaust some standees as soon as you play some intentions. And when these standees are exhausted, you can still move them. My card game comparisons actually had React at a 5 out of 10 for a bit, but after getting used to the systems and especially learning how to react to myself, the game rose to a 7 out of 10. I have a good time with it. If it had deck building possibilities so I don't see the same 4 cards over and over again, then yeah, the game could raise to a 8 out of 10. Thank you for watching the video. Brother Ming's Games sending us this game did not affect scoring. And as always, let me know what you think about this game. Maybe something similar to it we should take a look at. And patrons, yeah, thank you to our patrons over there, right over there. Patrons, thank you guys so much. And we got our Mad Lads of Cardboard to thank. Thank you, Mad Lads of Cardboard. And as always, remember to like, comment, subscribe. Yeah, let me know what you think about this game. React. Act.
I react with flowing ink.